get started in a second. We've got a couple more people coming in. This is a really important topic today. We've got a good amount of time. I think it's a 90-minute slot, correct? And we're going to have an ability for a lot of interaction between the audience and these experts on the panel. You know, they're going to give you some of their key thoughts and themes, but what they want is the engagement, because all of us recognize that we're going to learn from you as the audience, maybe even more so than you'll learn from us. So please engage. My name again is Roth Zitz. So I'm a 44-year veteran of the space sector. 33 of those years were as a government executive. Was in military intelligence before becoming CIA. Was at NRO for a number of years. I retired out of the NRO, but I also did stints at NGA and other parts of the community. I'm going to just do the name and title introduction of my panelists. Each of them will give you a little bit more background on themselves after we give just sort of the outline of this. So immediately to my left is Colonel Joe Roth from Space Force. To his left is Evan Rogers, CEO of True Anomaly. To his left is Dean Bellamy, who's the EVP or Executive Vice President of Redwire. And last but not least is our civilian from the National Reconnaissance Office, Steve Schmitz. The panel is, I'd say, probably 150 years of expertise here on the panel. And so we're going to hear a lot about their thoughts about what? About space situation awareness, how that relates to space domain awareness. We're going to talk about the need for SSA and SDA. There are civilian needs related to debris and a growing amount of debris in low Earth orbit. But there are also military requirements and threats that we're facing as a nation and as a collective of Five Eyes and beyond. So we're going to touch on all of that during the panel discussion this morning. One of the things that I think is going to be impressive to this audience and to this conference is, as you've seen the trajectory over the years going from a small number of very large, very expensive legacy systems to do not only traditional ISR communications, navigation, and so on, but now moving rapidly, including in the space situation awareness domain and SDA domain, to smaller satellites. I mean, this is the SmallSat conference. And we're going to talk about the technologies that are existing today and some ideas about where we see this going. But you know, there's never a perfect situation or solution, and so there are challenges and there are gaps, and we want to explore those with you this morning as well. Those challenges and gaps, yeah, some are technology gaps, but sometimes there are policy issues that can become impediments or barriers, and if so, we want to hear your thoughts about that and share our thoughts about it as well. So I want to make sure there's plenty of time, so I'm going to stop now. I'm going to hand over to Colonel Joe Roth, who will give an outline of what he's up to, and then we'll continue down, and then we'll go through a round of questions that I have, that I'm interested in, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. Sir?
Great. Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate being here. How's everybody doing this morning?
Good.
Yeah, pretty good. We're here at SmallSat. This is my very first time being at this conference. I know I wanted to go in the past a lot of times, but never could quite swing it. But really excited to be here, and thank you, Rob, for moderating the panel. But want to talk to you a little bit about my background, just briefly, and then get into the hard stuff, the questions both we have as a panel, and then also the questions you have as an audience. But I've got the best job in the Space Force. So I run the Innovation and Prototyping Acquisition Delta. So the men and women, the guardians of that Delta, are working tirelessly to deliver capabilities to stay ahead of the threat and to out-innovate that threat. We provide a really important function for getting experiments on orbit. So if you ever heard of the Space Test Program, the oldest space program in the Department of Defense, has been flying satellites since 1967. So a lot of those experiments, a lot of the products you see here on display have gone through my organization, and the men and women there are doing great work. We also do a prototype mission where these are more mature technologies, get them ready for potential operational use within systems. So we provide that bridge across the valley of death for technologies coming out of our labs, which is pretty awesome. The other cool thing about the innovation and prototyping acquisition delta is we do every facet of the mission. So from the idea to design, to integration, to launch, to operating on orbit, and then even disposing of it on orbit within one organization, which is pretty amazing. And we do that on 2 to 3 year centers. So when we develop a spacecraft, we go through that whole design phase, and think of yourself as a young guardian coming to work in this organization. You can experience the entire life cycle within that 2 to 3 year tour you have. So pretty awesome, and we're working with our industry partners quite a bit, and then our mission partners. So other mission partners across that focus on protecting the United States and our assets on space. We work with a lot of those mission partners and doing some really cool stuff. And it's great to see the conference growing here. I heard that we're at like record attendance this year, and it just shows you the amount of enthusiasm and both the government and the commercial sector, how much is being invested in space, which is pretty great to see. So, thank you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Evan Rogers. I'm the CEO of True Anomaly. We're a defense startup backed by venture. We have some very committed and interested investors in the defense space. Our company is focused on the sustainability, stability, and defense of the space domain. We're building 2 products that are focused entirely on the national security space enterprise. The first is space domain awareness and reconnaissance. So if you pay attention to General Saltzman and you pay attention to the broader national security space enterprise, we're really worried about the conditions of surprise in the space domain. There's hundreds and hundreds of objects that are being launched every single year. We don't always know what's going into space. We have an incredible intelligence apparatus, but sometimes things slide through the cracks. And the more capabilities that are in space, the higher the chances that we are going to miss something. What we're trying to disrupt is the intersection of quality of an image and scalability. So we have a lot of great companies in the United States and around the world that are working on metric observations, tracking position and velocity, and some core characteristics of systems in space. But what is yet to be really disrupted is the ability to collect any image or any intelligence product of any orbit, or of any object in any orbit. That's the core disruption that True Anomaly is trying to solve here. The second piece is readiness and training. So we have this brand new service, right? United States Space Force. We have a new combatant command, United States Space Command, and they have an unprecedented challenge to solve. Most services have the opportunity to engage in small-scale skirmishes. They get to do training, they get small conflicts to refine technology and to refine tactics. The challenge the Space Force has in front of them, and the United States Space Command has, is figuring out how to provide a credible deterrent and to be effective in a conflict that they'll basically get no practice for, except in peacetime competition. And that's where high-end, reliable training systems that allow us to explore a range of threat activities come into play. And we're building the virtual modeling simulation layer of that, but also the spacecraft layer. Building 2 systems. The first is a ground system we call Mosaic. Mosaic is an interoperable, separable ground system that allows us to do modeling simulation, to do threat analysis, to do kill chain analysis, and to train guardians all in one single environment. And then the space layer of that is a system we call the Jackal Autonomous Orbital Vehicle, and we'll have some exciting things to say about that. Dean and I will hear in a second. Quick on my background and why I started this company. So I was a space control guy from the beginning. I joined the military in 2013, and I was lucky enough to really see the rise of space control capabilities coming out of Russia and China. We've as a nation, we've kind of had our eye off the ball from 2001 to roughly 2015, and in that time, our adversaries have built very mature counter space capabilities, and they built an arsenal of them. the Space Force and the national security space community need an industrial partner to solve some of those problems. And they need an ecosystem of partners represented by many of the folks in this room. I ended up my career as a developmental and operational tester, so I saw how hard it was to try to evaluate a weapon system for which you don't really understand the operational requirements. You're making the operational requirements up on the fly, and that is prolific. That wasn't just one program that I got to work on. That is across the board. We had some serious challenges to solve at the intersection of SDA and readiness. Happy to be here.
Good morning. For folks, there's a few other seats if anybody would like to sit down. Please do. Rob, I just want to say it's a really honor to be here with my distinguished colleagues that I've actually had a chance to know from different times, whether I was in uniform during my almost 27 years in uniform in the Space Force or working in the NRO, and then now also in industry as well. It's been actually just a true honor to be up here with them. At Redwire, Executive Vice President for National Security Space, and for those who, just show of hands real quick, how many people have heard of Redwire? Awesome. Hey, I love that. Hey, Omar, you get the credit for that. Hey, our marketing and communication team doing a great job on that. But no, Redwire is really a pure play space company. We're focused really on the three sectors: national security space that we're going to talk about here, commercial and civil. Just to name a few products that folks probably saw just a few months ago. You were probably watching the NASA channel, and you saw our rollout solar arrays being actually deployed by astronauts on the International Space Station. Some other activities you would know Redwire from. How many people were tracking the Artemis program when it went up into space? Saw the great images of the moon, the Earth, and the sun and the Artemis program? Well, those are Redwire cameras, and we're really proud. Our engineers here, we have folks in the audience that our general manager of our optics and cameras, and actually Giuseppe, who actually ran that program. I'm going to embarrass him for a minute. Giuseppe, stand up. You got to stand up. I want to embarrass you. He's our guy. Did a really great job on it. Giuseppe, really hats off to you and the entire team on that. The last thing I'll just say as we go into it is one thing that you'll hear and you'll see about Redwire, not only here at this conference but other conferences, it's really the people that are behind the scenes and the people in front that are doing the job. Really proud of the culture and the people, and that really starts with our CEO, Pete Canito. For those who are tracking, we did have our earnings report this morning, and really can't say much about that other than what's on the international relation page, but really another great morning at Redwire and excited to be here.
Hi everybody, my name is Steve Schmitz. I'm in panel. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's my first SmallSat conference, and very impressed with the level of discussions that are taking place and the number of books that are here. SDA is one of those areas that is forcing everybody to think differently because it's now more accessible to get into space. And I think that's going to increase even more as more launch vehicles come in, as more people are learning space. Students especially that are here, very excited. And in order to make SDA work, it's really about people, partners, and innovation.
Absolutely. Well said.
Hey, thanks a lot. I think since we talked SSA, we mentioned SDA, probably we're spending a minute out here in the beginning saying, what's the difference between the two? And I really think the government panelists could do that. I'll say, as people ask me that, neighbors, others who hear about this, they'll say, yeah, it's Neighborhood Watch. I mean, we entitled the name of this Neighborhood Watch. But when you think about your Nest cams, your Ring cams, your Neighborhood Watch that might be in your neighborhood, it's not just a watch, it's to be able to act if needed. And that action might be just a health and welfare check, or it might be a tactical response, depending on what your cameras pick up or what your Neighborhood Watch sees going on. So, Carl, could you give from your perspective, what are we talking about when we say space domain awareness?
Yeah, so definitely want to, there's JP1, there's a publication that defines exactly what the military terms are. Really important that we have the same understanding of what those military terms are. And when this was even before the Space Force stood up, there was a shift from space situational awareness, just having a more passive understanding of the environment and what's up there, to a more, hey, we need to really understand what's going on. We took that from our other joint partners, the Navy. They had maritime domain awareness, where we really needed to know where the ships were, what cargo they were bringing in and out to protect from terrorist threats or other threats to the nation. So we've applied that same terminology to space. So that's why the name was changed. It's now Space Domain Awareness. But as you go further out into cislunar space, it switches back to space situational awareness, more of that understanding of what's out there versus actually actively, going at having really good exquisite knowledge. I think, the whole reason we have a Space Force today is because of that threat and that focus. Many thought, it was a good organizational idea. Which it was, a very good organizational idea to set up the Space Force, but we are laser focused on that threat. The understanding of what's up in space is really important. So to protect the nation, we have shifted from we had 20 years of peace after the Cold War, and there weren't a lot of threats. We've developed systems that are vulnerable to attacks. And we're going to a more protected, disaggregated systems on orbit. But with that, if you see all the Pelio constellations and the number of satellites being launched, it's really a hard problem to understand where all the satellites are, if they're the good guys or the bad guys, or everything in between, or if it's junk, and junk could be a bad guy if it runs into the International Space Station or one of your satellites. So really need to understand the environment a lot better, and the Space Force is investing in that arena. Be real interested to get the rest of the team's perspective on the change and how we're focusing on this mission area.
Yeah, Steve, all of us kind of grew up under General John Haight, and we all remember that 60 Minutes episode several years ago now, where people kind of rattled folks in the administration when he used the W word, space is a warfighting domain. And so you've been at DIA doing space counterspace and now PRO. What's your take on the differences?
Warfighting domain is an interesting term to put out there. It can be both protective and can both be destructive. And we've changed our thinking that space would be a domain that you would fight through, meaning a launch missile would fly through space impact. Well, now, warfighting is really, when someone's approaching, is that a consensual approach? Is it a non-consensual approach? Do you make a response? And is that response that you make, will that draw hostilities? And part of the warfighting is deterrence and communication. And maybe as we proliferate more constellations, maybe we should have satellites talking to satellites and be able to say, hi, I can't maneuver, and I'm coming towards you. Can you move? Or I can move, you can move. And rather than playing chicken, recently happened, maybe we both agreed to move 6 feet this way and I move 6 feet that way. So we both pay a price. And I think warfighting can mean so many things from the perspective. Corporate warfare, industry wants to compete against industry, get the money. Countries want to have same conflict, they would like superiority. And so as we move forward, we really have to understand what is warfighting in space.
Yeah, can I add on to that?
Yeah,
so Steve, I think even what we heard Colonel Roth saying and you saying, and I know Evan would agree with me, one thing we've seen since some of the adversary provocative activities going back to the early 2007 with some of the anti-satellite tests, and then more activities we've seen that are could be viewed in one lens as reckless or provocative. You really need that space domain awareness to have indications of warning of what's going on, characterization of what's going on. Is it a friendly foe? Is it inadvertent, right, with those norms of behavior? And attribution of what's going on. And I think that reinforces what General Burton has talked about with norms of behavior, with allies, and actually what should be the rules for how you safely and securely to maintain stability and security in space, operate a spacecraft. And you mentioned the games of chicken. Some of those things, can be inadvertent, but if taken the wrong way, right, can send the wrong signal. So I really think I agree with Colonel Roth is that the space domain awareness is really critical to understand what's going on around all these spacecraft. And it's going to be an effort with commercial. It's going to be an effort with government and allies. It's going to be a team effort, I think.
It is, absolutely. In years past, space was vast, and today it's really congested, and SDA is going to help us solve those problems. It's like traffic cameras in the freeway. It helps when you're planning your trip, it helps with the management of that system, intersections, and so having partnerships across government, across industry, academics, and across other nations is really important.
The definition of SDA has expanded really in two pretty important ways, and I think part of this is because the Space Force has taken a pretty important conceptual turn now when it talks about its mission and Space Command. The new CSO has talked about offense and defense very clearly and very openly. It's been emphatic that the principles of offense and defense are not classified. Very consistent with this idea that space is a warfighting domain. The Space Force's mission includes developing, organizing, training, and equipping forces that are designed to protect the joint force from space-enabled attack. So as kill chains have become more and more interdependent from our adversaries on space capabilities, that means that those space capabilities are valid for disruption. This also means that SDA isn't just about telescopes and radars. It's a multidisciplinary discipline that requires open source, requires every sensor phenomenology, employs other aspects of the intelligence community to try to get a complete picture of what's going on in the space domain. And it's not just what's going on orbit. Space domain awareness includes anything now, I believe, that affects the space domain. So activities that are on the ground.
Or activities from the sun. So space weather is a key part of space domain awareness mission. And I know we're flying a lot of sensors and trying to proliferate that. And as a warfighting domain too, you need to understand what happened to your satellite. Was it a charged particle event that had your computer do a bit flip and it was a natural phenomena, or if it was an adversary attack on your system. So really important. And one area we don't talk a lot about is the cyber domain for space. Domain awareness includes a lot of different mission areas. It's just not radars and optical systems.
I would agree. And one thing I think a lot of people have been, I'd say a lot of friends and friendly faces, a day without space. But if you can imagine a day without space and what could happen if an event inadvertently happened, if it was a safety related, or if it was actually warfighting and it was an adversary threat. Imagine if your GPS didn't work. How many people use maps today to actually drive here, right? You wouldn't be able to use your maps to be able to get here, or if you weren't be able to pay at the pump or banking got disrupted, it could be incredibly disruptive, whether it be inadvertent or actually intentional.
So as we move to the next questions, Evan mentioned the fact that it's not just space, it's space segment, ground, and all. How many people in the room here are working on space segment in your companies or agencies? Okay, hands down, how many people work ground? And I would have to believe that a lot of people who work ground feel like, hey, that's always sort of the thing that isn't paid as much attention to and not as sexy and not as much money. We lived through all that in ISR with the stand-up of what became NGA and so on. And it's not just space, it's ground. We heard panelists talk here about commercial and the importance of commercial. We've also understood over the last couple of years that there's now a hybrid space architecture. And when that first came to be and the notion came out, now it seems like that's good doctrine. Could you guys talk about what you think that means, the integration of government and commercial, and how important that is to what we're all trying to do? Sir, why don't you start?
Okay, so really that hybrid architecture, and we're really benefiting from all the gains in the commercial industry in ISR, looking at the planet and that space sensing mission. Back 10, 20 years ago, it was really the domain of governments to be able to provide that ISR capability. But the miniaturization of sensors, electronics, and the lowering barriers of the cost of launch has gotten a lot more sensors up there. And so the approach the Space Force is doing is, partnering with our commercial industry and industry partners and taking advantage of that network and the gains there. You see that in Ukraine. I think we'll talk a little bit later about how commercial space really helped shed light on what was really going on in Ukraine and was very valuable to the world. So I think there's some opportunities there. I will quote, so General Raymond, when he was the CSO, he said space was hard. It's even in our Space Force commercial that we sent out there to recruit Guardians. But I will say those that are working ground is even harder, and but yours is much more important. We could develop these satellite systems, but if we can't develop the ground systems to control it, but really get the data where it needs to go, it doesn't matter how good your satellite is. If we can't get it to the right warfighter or the commercial entity or NOAA on hurricane forecasting, it doesn't matter. So ground is important, and we should always consider that when we're acquiring our space systems.
Steve?
NRO is really focused right now on buying what we can and only building what we must. And when it comes to ground, it is always sort of up there in the side. But ground is very important in being able to communicate at speed between stations, between consumers, between decision makers, between partners. Very important. And that whole cyber piece, how do you know when you're under a cyber attack? And then who do you call? Who's going to do that protect? Who's going to do that repair? And how long? Because once you sever those columns, it's very difficult to make decisions at speed.
Well, in the commercial integration, of course, the NRO with their Commercial Systems Program Office, Pete Moon and Jeremy Bannock, you know, they're doing incredible work, and that's where Maxar, Black Sky, Hawkeye, ISI, and so on and so forth have those contracts. From, I don't want to put you on the spot, maybe it's for the whole panel, it's also Space Force. Do we see similar interest and demand signal for SSA, so for commercial SSA at NRO? Like in the future, I can imagine there would be a study contract and then a contract for commercial SSA or Space Force doing the same.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was at DIA, we stood up PubStud, Unified Data Library. And the intent was to populate this SSA data from multiple phenomenologies to start understanding what is the pattern of life in space, what is that optempo, what are the effects of space water and people maneuvering. And so commercial has been the big provider of that. And when you take the commercial piece and combine that with the intel community and the DoD piece, you have a very complete picture.
Absolutely. I think it's just really a natural evolution of what we're seeing. You look at the war today in Ukraine, Russia doesn't care if the satellite, we see what they're doing to commercial, right? Whether it's commercial or government, if they are going to disrupt and they feel they need to disrupt, they don't care and they don't label it. They just say US or allied, and they're going to do things to try to jam it or disrupt it. And I do believe holistically with these hybrid architectures, commercial is going to play a vital role, I think, for SSA in space. I think that you see no different than we see today in other types of phenomenologies. But if you take ISR from space to ground, it is a mix of government, commercial, and allied, right? And I think you're going to see the same mix for when you look at space-based SSA, and I think commercial, and you look at True Anomaly, really proud to see all the work that True Anomaly is doing and the work you've made to really show the importance of that and the importance of having a company like True Anomaly who's going to get out there and actually is going to help fill in these gaps and vulnerabilities that exist, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that is starting to emerge is to think about how commercial companies can contribute to integrated deterrence. Whether we know it or not, we actually are. The defense industrial base is one of the most powerful deterrent mechanisms for adversaries. That's been challenged recently, obviously, in the conflict with Ukraine vis-a-vis munitions. But now we have, we find ourselves in kind of an interesting situation where commercial companies are doing things in space that are going to set norms and standards of behavior. We'd be very careful about that. We shouldn't be afraid to kind of push the envelope, as long as it's in concert and partnership with open communication with our government partners, so that we can set the right standards and really be part of the solution rather than part of complicating surveillance activities that are going on with it.
Well, in the perspective of the Space Force is really, you hit the nail on the head. I'm glad you're using the exploit, buy, build. So exploit what you have. There is tons of data out there already how do we exploit it and leverage it to good use? Buy what you can. So the government should be, the industry is matured enough, the government should not be making satellites unless it's tailor-made for the warfighting mission. So if we can take advantage of buying commercial buses, commercial satellite systems, commercial ISR, commercial services, it is much better value for the government to do so. So we stood up for Space Systems Command back at Space Symposium, the commercial space office led by Colonel Rich Nicely, that kind of unified the Space Systems Command front door, that one-stop shop for Space Systems Command to reach out to non-traditional companies and small business to work with the Space Force. But that office was designed to get after what the NRO has been doing, and Pete Moon and their commercial arm is really get after that innovation in the commercial sector. That's how we deter conflict. That's really important in space, and so leveraging that to full effect will be really important for the space.
Well, and just to underline that, I know that your PEO, Space Domain Awareness Combat Power, I think F. Schnell and others in there, Ted Janiak, they helped sponsor a DARPA. People haven't seen this, I'd encourage you to go look at it. Ray Cooperman is the program manager for something called Space Watch, which is all about helping to foster a commercial SSA to support, and the transition partner will of course be Space Force. So I think we're seeing some really good things. I think there's probably been, I'd like to just touch on with the two NRO and Space Force, you know, in the press and in public, sometimes there's a perception that things aren't as coordinated or collaborative between the two different missions, you know, national intelligence, tactical. Could you two touch on that and how the two agencies or two groups are working together?
Sure. We are an intel organization as well as a DoD organization, so we support the warfighter. Using Ukraine as an example, we had our exclusive information, but we also had commercial information. And that commercial information that we were able to provide both to the services, U.S. Space Command, UCOM, taking that commercial data enabled us to move very quickly and attract new partners. And we can actually say, you don't have to believe us, the United States, believe these commercial providers, because they're seeing the same thing. And we could move at speed, and we could talk about things that we normally couldn't talk about because commercial has seen that. And another really good example is in SSA, there was a commercial company that launched a competitor's satellite do a high energetic maneuver. And so that enables a whole other level of conversation and being able to talk to the command and talk to the force. And we are trying to integrate and figure out how do we complement each other versus being duplicative or being competitive.
Yeah, I think we have a really good forum for working with the national security space community, where we work with hand in hand with the NRO. They have a different mission than the Space Force does. We also have the Combatant Command, U.S. Space Command, and so we do have missions that are similar, but also overlap. And I think that's actually really good. It adds us some robustness in the seams, but we're focused on OPIR, the missile warning, and there's a lot of data that we're pulling off our missile warning satellites that you can analyze and find out other information from that to protect our forces overseas. I think our space domain awareness marketplace, we're starting that. It's moving forward. And we're basically building a marketplace from scratch to buy data. And our goal would be that commercial companies who need space domain awareness data could go in there and buy that as well without having to develop their own space domain awareness capability. So I know F. Schnell, you mentioned him, he's in charge of space domain awareness, acquisition Delta for the command, one of our civilian guardians in a leadership role, and working really hard on that problem. We also have tactically responsive space. Sometimes that's responding to a threat. Sometimes that's responding to a combatant commander need. So if you need tactical ISR capabilities, I know our Space Safari office is looking at concepts to rapidly deploy a satellite system or network to support our joint warfighting.
So how many people in the audience work on cybersecurity or protecting information? So just a few. I know I've heard one of the three about to become a 4-star general say that the Achilles heel of the hybrid space architecture is data integrity. And so could you guys comment on cyber and even specifically about how do we ensure that as we are blending commercial capabilities, international capabilities with US, where we've been able to be a little bit more able to provide protection for our own government systems. How do we blend all of that together and ensure that the data has not been modified, spoofed, and that the systems are protected from a cyber standpoint? Sir?
Yeah, I think that's a really important area to the Space Force. We even have a whole career field dedicated to cyber protection of space assets. Out at Space Systems Command out in LA, we have an office that is developing the Manicore and Kraken systems to basically monitor our networks and then take action if we find an adversary in that network. So the Space Force is investing a lot in that area because you're right, it is an Achilles heel. If we develop these exquisite satellites and networks of satellites, but we leave the back door open and our adversaries can get in there. So a lot of efforts there. I think we still need to leverage commercial. Some of the revolutionary ideas in cyber protection are from the commercial market, protecting systems such as banks, treasuries, markets, etc. And how do we leverage that and pull that into the space domain will be really important. It'd be exciting to hear what our industry partners have.
One of the reasons that the defense startups stay stealth for a long time is because as soon as they come out of stealth mode and they start getting press, they become targets. And one of the most interesting experiences that we had in Anomaly was really seeing that unfold in real time. And it makes you, it puts it right in your face that you are one of the attack surfaces for bad actors in the cyber domain. We've made massive investments in this. It's one of my highest priorities because we are an attack surface, and if we're going to be reliable partners to the DoD, we have to have the protections in place, and we have to have the ability to say we have high confidence in our ability to deliver data that is federated, that is valid, that isn't spoofed. And it's one of the reasons that it's actually so difficult to fund defense startups from the venture side because it's very expensive to have a robust cybersecurity campaign and infrastructure in place. So we invest very heavily. We've seen the results of it, and we've also seen the power of interacting with our government partners on the intelligence side and the law enforcement side to make sure that we're passing information that we can be a sensor for counterintelligence activities across the board, and we're certainly not the only ones who do that. But we're focused not just on shoring up infrastructure for the company, but also on our mission systems and mission data, which is one of the reasons we deployed to Azure Orbital, so we didn't have to build a lot of that infrastructure ourselves.
Very similar to Evan, I would say Nick Andrews, our CIO, former Navy captain, internally, we have a really major investment on cybersecurity where we protect all the development software and all the hardware things that we're developing for space and space components. And so they have a full team 24/7, 365 that are always monitoring and actually protecting our networks and data. And then secondly, we actually have this capability called SpaceCrest. So I'm going to put Daniel Cleveland and Alex Dunn, kind of wave your hands, Daniel and Alex. Danielle and Alex are part of something called SpaceCrest. And so what we do, that is actually...
You said SpaceCrest?
SpaceCrest.
Crest.
Crest.
Okay,
C-R-E-S-T. Sorry, that was my southern accent. That was my southern accent coming out. Sorry about that. I'm from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. SpaceCrest, and it is a joint effort with a company called Big Bear AI. And what we're doing is we're actually taking individual components, whether it be a Star Trek or other types of components, and they're actually doing cyber resilience on them to look for vulnerabilities. Maybe in the software, it could have been some open source code that was leveraged from 2014 or beyond, and validating those to make sure that we can offer recommendations before something gets flown that is more hardened, cyber resilient. Now that is a very hard problem to do because as you're building, the defensive, there's all the other folks doing the offensive, and it's a definitely cat and mouse game. But they've done tremendous work. Really proud of Danielle and Alex and our Big Bear team doing the Space Crest work. So shout out to them if you're interested.
Yeah, so we're about to turn it open to Q&A, but you just talked about collaboration. So, I mean, can you give other examples of where you partner with other industries?
Absolutely. From a news perspective, I'd like to, Evan, we have some news maybe we want to talk about.
Yeah, we did. So today we're announcing some of our suppliers. One of our most important suppliers, Redwire. That was my not-southern accent. We've had a partnership for past almost over a year, or about a year now, with Redwire, and been an amazing partner on the design side and on the production side. And we've purchased 3 cameras per vehicle from Redwire, and we're announcing that ongoing partnership today.
Absolutely, really excited. And this is really, I think, the heartbeat, Rob, for where you see industry collaborations working together to actually move fast on the commercial side, but to also help the government as well, right? So it's going to be fantastic. And True Anomaly's been a great partner. We're excited about not only the work we've done, but the future that we're going to do as well. So excited about that. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm from Aiken, South Carolina. They have classes for that. So we're going to come back to AI and different sensor types and so on, but so we want to open it up. You've been listening to this. Anybody have a question for this panel? It's so over in the corner over here. Yes. No, you. Yes, sir.
Yeah. As we move more and more military systems to commercial, by commercial services, commercial systems, and therefore essentially displacing custom-built military systems, at some point these commercial systems become critical infrastructure. And we have to address the question of how to protect them, which we probably can't talk about a whole lot in this forum. But another question also is suggested, an analogy to the air world, where I think it's actually a voluntary arrangement, but aircraft can actually be seized or commandeered in times of national emergency, and therefore used for DoD and defense purposes. Do we think that kind of arrangement would be necessary with these commercial arrangements we're making in the space domain?
Well, it's like we planted you in the audience, but we really didn't. But there is an effort going on right now. It started last February called the Commercial Space Reserve Augmented Force. So the CASR, Commercial Augmented Space Reserve, is a effort by the Space Force to talk with industry and policymakers, et cetera, to see if that aircraft model, the CRAFT model, Civil Reserve Air Fleet model, could apply to space systems as well. If you look at the CRAFT model from the CRAFT model we use for aircraft, it's very, very lucrative for those commercial air cargo contracts to be a part of that organization. And then in a time of war, they can call up and use those to transport cargo or military personnel across the country. That was used very rarely. The only 2 times in modern history we've used it is for Desert Storm, and then also when we left Afghanistan here recently. We called in commercial to help us get the cargo out quickly and the personnel, so it has been used. But it also works well because you enforce standards of interoperability between these different air carriers. You know, how do we enforce standards or make it easier to have plug-and-play options with different satellite providers or data providers, et cetera. So we are exploring that area, and there was actually a conference last week in the DC area on Commercial Augmented Space Reserve, CASR, and it's a topic that the Space Force and then policymakers are definitely looking at, and we could leverage, and I think it would be beneficial. A key part of that, though, is, and they said it earlier in the panel, is our commercial partners, you're already targets of potential adversary action. So, in the conflict in Ukraine, they're not making a distinction between military and civilian satellites. They're going after them if they're if they're providing information that helps the adversary or hurts the adversary in that conflict. It's really important to have a good partnership with our industry and our allies and partners overseas. So this is not just the United States. It's everybody in there to ensure that space remains a peaceful domain And if we can do that concept and make it deter conflict, because we have that, we should do it.
In both of the examples in which craft was called up, we had air superiority. We don't have that luxury in space. Best we're going to do is likely localized space superiority, whatever localized ends up meaning. There is a question that has come up over the last 2 months. Maybe it's confirmation bias, but you're starting to see the kind of pitch rising where commercial companies, and I think the DoD are asking themselves, how do we think about the dependency of commercial? How do we think about the defense of commercial? How do commercial companies then think about the defense of themselves? That's something that hasn't been said explicitly a lot, but I think is an important place for the market to kind of mature its thinking about and really come out of, like, hey, it's really nice to use the government, this kind of naive idea that it's really nice for the government to fund your business, right? And to sell great products to the company, to the government, excuse me. But it comes with this baggage that I think now we're starting to really get clear about. And there are implications for that, not just on the cyber side, but there's also other ways to defend yourselves that I think we as a community, commercial community, need to start thinking about so that we can be good partners to the DoD in the spirit of integrated deterrence. But also it's a question of sustainability. If a commercial company becomes a target and that results in a catastrophic event, then we're just contributing to the problem of sustainability in lower growth in particular. So it's a complex topic, and I would like to see the industry come together around some thoughts so that we can have a kind of an integrated front to go to the DoD and maybe members of the Hill and say, here's how industry is thinking about sustainability and security and stability and the interdependence with government.
Yeah, I agree with both my colleagues. I would just add a different lens. When you look at it, it won't always have to be commercial relying on the government. I believe that there will be commercial partnerships. When you look at the space economy, a need for one commercial company, maybe even to Anomaly, to come in there and provide them support if there's an issue with an anomaly on the spacecraft or something, and not always the dependence on the government. I think that there will be commercial services available where they'll be able to do no different than at home, right? At home, for security, you can always pick up the phone, call 911, and the government is there, the police department is there, but you can also pay for commercial service like an ADT or a Ring camera to provide that commercial augmentation. And I think that you'll see the same thing in space in just different ways.
Yeah, so for the home audience who didn't hear the question, obviously it was about integrated deterrence.
Yeah.
So as we ask questions, please state your name and I'll summarize your question and make sure it gets picked up. By the way, who else in the room thought, this reminds me a lot of that old joke about two hikers going through the woods, they see a grizzly bear. One of them says to the other, I don't have to be faster than the bear, I just have to be faster than you. So you wonder if maybe an NRO or Space Force satellite's looking at one of the commercial satellites. Any other questions? We have questions in the audience, I'm sure. Yes, sir, right here in the front.
So I know insurance for space is kind of a big topic right now, especially with the potential for like the Viasat claim going through. And you mentioned the bit flip issue, where that could be an energetic particle or it could be a cybersecurity infiltration type thing. I know insurers are having difficulty capitalizing that because they can't actually predict the probability of a cybersecurity event, so they're actually having trouble underwriting that sort of thing, and it's becoming, it seems like it could become an issue for insurers to underwrite for future missions. So when we're talking about commercial providing for the military in the future, is the government doing anything to, help that from becoming a barrier of entry, right? These insurers are, private entities, and they're trying to protect their interests as well. But, with these sorts of claims and the difficulty between how we view cybersecurity risks, how does that move forward, and how do you prevent that, how do you prevent the commercial entities from, becoming essentially too scared to get into these activities?
So just to recap the question, how does everything we're talking about here affect insurance for satellites and other assets?
Well, I think the insurance angle is something I don't have any expertise on. I think that's the commercial industry and market. for that. As the Space Force, we're kind of self-insured, so we want to make sure our systems work and we are responsible for them. But in the commercial market, I would say that there's how we interface with commercial entities. We already have cybersecurity standards, the risk management framework. Before we connect to another system, your commercial system has to pass a rigorous screening and collection and testing to make sure you can actually connect with our systems. That's at the unclassified level, all the way up to really classified programs. So there's different levels of security and standards. Really interesting question on the insurance angle, and then how do you calculate risk? Hopefully there's other industries the space insurers can model that on, the banking industry or others, where it does protecting of those assets is critical. So it'd be interesting, some of our panel, and then the NRO as well. So.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to make a comment. You made an interesting comment where you said, you're self-insured, but that's where, commercial companies might be afraid to jump in because they are trying to get that, insurance on their assets they're going to be putting up, right?
Yeah. But I'm sorry, Colonel. Finish your thought.
Yeah. So, and really, we're using taxpayer dollars and money, so it's really important that we don't risk that. So we kind of insure, and we know that it's the American public's money, and we want to do everything we can to protect it, make sure that system works, and that goes for cyber as well. We don't want adversaries being able to infiltrate our systems real easily, but we do not use the commercial insurance market, but our industry partners absolutely do.
Yeah, I want to flip that question and say, for Dean and Evan, I mean, is it true that if you had a company that can much more precisely place an object in space and time, that data could be sold from that commercial company to the insurance companies, who would then be able to mitigate risk?
I absolutely think that that's what you'll see more with. You'll see more cameras and optics doing that kind of either mission from an SSA mission, or determining whether it's a spacecraft anomaly, or if there's a safety issue, or if there's a security issue. And I think what it's going to provide is more stability in space. And that really, Evan, gets back to what you were talking about. The more awareness we have and indications of it could be safety, security, or it could be a threat from an adversary, the more knowledge we have on that, the better it will do. And I think it will reduce the insurance rate.
Yeah, that's right.
Insurance you asked a very hard question. Luckily, the intel community, NRO, DoD, we excel at hard problems like that. I think in order to get an answer, we have to have more conversations with insurance, with industry, and we talked about warfare earlier. So what does an attack look like? Well, for tank warfare and sea battles, we understand that. But for space, we really don't. And that insurance data is very mineable in finding out, was this a manufacturing area? Was this an act of God that you can't control inert objects? You can't control the debris? So as we have these discussions, we can actually start to explore what does that look like, and what kind of information do industry and government need to share. And a lot of these discussions are occurring at the Space ISAC out in Colorado Springs. It's nascent, it's got 75 members, but it's a start. It's only been around for a year, and I think that'll help drive those conversations and start bringing in these linkages. Because some of these questions have never been answered and never been asked. And so it's really finding out who has that experience and who has that knowledge. Darren McKnight, for example, and Frank D'Agostino, a couple of years ago, did exactly a neat study on what is insurance companies paying for and what are they not paying for, and then what is the impact of that in our acquisition process.
Yeah, that's about when I remember what Darren and McKnight and Frank D'Agostino did work on that. It was really good analysis. But your question is valid, but it sounds like there's a forum out there that's at least looking at the problem, right?
Yeah, yes.
So we've got 5 minutes, I think, left, and I want to come back to the panel now and say, could we do a really fast round robin, and each of you say, first of all, what are the key things that you're excited about in terms of the technology or otherwise, and then what's a key gap? What are you seeing that's crazy good, and what's a key gap? Could we walk through quickly, sir?
Okay. I see the commercial accessing and leveraging commercial as a really important avenue for the Space Force, whether it's space domain awareness, ISR, cybersecurity, all these different mission areas that not every mission area has a commercial market for, but there's many that industry is providing. I think that being able to exploit what's already out there and not reinventing the wheel is one of our key aspects of going after these different mission areas. And then I would say gaps. As we learn and grow and how to protect the domain, there'll be some lessons we learn. I know some of the threats that the Department of Defense publishes that we're actively pursuing is for hypersonic threats. How can we see those threats, give us enough early warning to protect either our systems or our infrastructure? And I think there's a lot that we can do, and it's a growing area, and I'm really glad you're all here helping us solve some of these problems.
Thank you, sir.
Well, the thing that I'm most excited about is our launch that's coming up in February. We're pretty focused on that right now. We have a number of course, technology gaps that we see in the marketplace. I think where we see the most work to be done is in regulatory clarity. And clarity, literally on the topic we were just circling on over the last few minutes here, which is the role of the relationship between commercial and the intelligence community and the government more broadly. How do we think about that when it comes to allies? How do we think about liability? How do we think about the opportunities that come out of those relationships in terms of defense and security for private companies? There's a whole ecosystem of new markets and new capabilities that are starting to be born because we have the people that are in this room, and I think one of the strongest defense industrial bases and space industrial bases that we've ever had. The future is really bright.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'm really most encouraged about partnerships. We talked with Anomaly, and on the industry side of partnerships. On the government side, whether it be with the Space Force or AFRA, RB, Redwire, we've been able to take technologies like our rollout solar arrays, transition them, and actually now flying them on the International Space Station. And so when you look at that, or with some of our antennas or our cameras, I'm really excited about where we are as an industry base and where we're really supporting space as a whole for both national security, commercial, and civil. I will tell you the thing you asked about, the thing that's the gap to me is you can't foot stomp it enough. I know Colonel Roth and Mr. Gabelli and Dr. Scalise and General Saltzman are dealing with it, but the adversary threat, the adversary is continuing to move at a pace that you just cannot believe, and they're not going to quit. They're going to keep coming. And really the leaders that we have in place today are really helping us stay up and actually surpass them. And I'm really excited about that. It is a gap, but the positive is we've got the right leaders in place and they're doing the right roadmaps and plans so that we can get ahead of that threat.
Steve? Absolutely. I'm really excited about partnerships and proliferation. As we go into proliferated ground architectures and proliferated space architectures, they're going to be a hybrid. And so we really need industry, we need our foreign partners. And when we look at the Five Eyes, we're really 5 nations, separated by common language. And so better communication at speed, sharing resources, and improving our workforce. I think that's where our gap is.
Awesome, and thank you, panelists. I hope everybody in the audience agrees. This was a good start for your day. I think all the panelists are going to be around either immediately after or during the day, and maybe tomorrow. Please seek them out and talk to them. And they want to know your thoughts and your ideas about what they can do and do better. Thank you. Thanks a lot.